The banquet hall at Westbrook University smelled like fresh roses and warm bread rolls, and somewhere near the back, a string quartet was playing something soft and forgettable. Round tables stretched the length of the room, each one dressed in white linen and gold centerpieces, and somewhere between 300 and 400 people filled those seats. Parents, grandparents, siblings, professors, all of them buzzing with the particular warmth that comes when someone you love has just done something worth celebrating. I remember standing near the far end of the head family table, holding a glass of sparkling cider that had gone slightly flat, and thinking to myself, this is it. This is the moment everything I gave was worth something. My name is Catherine Mercer. I am 44 years old. I am a major in the United States Army, and for 22 years I wore that uniform not because someone told me to, but because I believed, and still believe, that service is the highest calling a person can answer. I have stood in rooms where the wrong word could start a conflict. I have sat across tables from people who wanted me to flinch, and I did not flinch. I have made decisions in the field that cost me sleep for months, decisions I would make again because they were the right ones. None of that prepared me for what Marcus did that night. Let me say his name clearly before I go any further. Marcus Mercer. My husband of 12 years. A man I loved with the kind of quiet, certain love that doesn't need to announce itself. The kind that shows up on a Tuesday morning making breakfast, that saves you the better parking spot, that squeezes your hand in a dark movie theater for no reason other than to say I am here, and I am glad you are too. Or so I believed. The evening had started beautifully. Our son, Jordan, had crossed that graduation stage 3 hours earlier in his black gown and gold tassel, and when his name was called, I stood up before I even realized my legs had moved. I clapped until my palms burned. Jordan found me in that crowd of hundreds the way he always found me, immediately, without searching, like he had a compass that pointed my direction. He gave me a look, just a look. The kind that only a mother and the child she raised can share, the one that says I did this for you too. At 22, Jordan was everything I had poured myself into for the better part of 2 decades. He was kind in a way that startled strangers. He remembered birthdays without being reminded. He laughed easily, apologized genuinely, and asked questions that made people feel like their answers actually mattered. Teachers used to call me to say they wished they had a room full of him. I would hang up the phone and sit quietly for a moment with that pride spreading through my chest like warm tea. The reception was alive and full. Marcus moved through it the way he always did, easy and charming, working the room, shaking hands with Jordan's professors, laughing at his own jokes a half-second before anyone else. He had 3 glasses of champagne before the formal toasting even began, which I noticed but said nothing about, because tonight was Jordan's night, and I had long ago learned to choose my battles carefully. The MC, a cheerful man in a burgundy jacket, took the microphone just after 8 o'clock to open the floor for family tributes. A few parents spoke briefly. A grandmother teared up. Someone's uncle went slightly too long, and people started shifting in their seats. And then Marcus stood. He didn't wait to be called. He crossed the front of the room with the confidence of a man who has never once questioned his right to take up space, reached out for the microphone with an easy smile, and the MC handed it over without hesitation, because Marcus has always had that effect on people. He looks like someone you trust before he's said a word. Good, I thought, straightening in my chair. He's finally going to say something meaningful, something Jordan deserves to hear from his father. I actually felt a warmth in my chest. I leaned forward slightly. I was genuinely proud of him for this moment, for choosing tonight to be the kind of father Jordan had always needed him to be. I just want to take a minute, Marcus said, his voice smooth and warm, to recognize someone very special. The room settled, champagne glasses stilled. Catherine, he looked directly at me, smiled, and something in that smile, even then, felt slightly wrong in a way I could not name. 12 years ago, I brought home another man's problem, and this woman took it on without complaint. The room did not go quiet immediately. It took a half-second, the length of time it takes the human brain to process something it doesn't want to have heard correctly. Then the quiet arrived like a wall. She fed him, drove him places, showed up to his games. Marcus shrugged, the gesture so casual it was almost artistic. I want to thank my wife for being such a dedicated babysitter all these years. He raised his glass. He actually raised his glass. I felt the cider in my hand turn to ice. I felt 300 pairs of eyes swing toward me with the specific horror of people witnessing something they cannot look away from. I felt my face do something I couldn't control, a sort of frozen stillness. The way a soldier's face goes neutral under fire, not from bravery, but from the pure overload of what is happening. I thought, this is not real. He did not just say that. Not here, not tonight, not in front of Jordan. And then I heard the sound of a chair sliding back from a table near the front of the room. I looked up. Jordan was standing. Before I tell you what Jordan said that night, I need to tell you who he was. Who he actually was, not the version Marcus presented in that toast like he was explaining a charity project. I met Marcus Mercer at a military fundraiser in Arlington, Virginia, on a Saturday night in early autumn when the air still had some warmth left in it. I was 31 and had just come off a difficult 8-month deployment that had left me quieter than usual, the kind of quiet that takes a while to explain to people who haven't experienced it themselves. He was 34, a commercial property developer. Tall, with dark hair going silver at the temples, and a laugh that filled up whatever room it was in. He was at the event supporting a veterans' housing initiative, which impressed me more than the laugh. We talked for 2 hours. He got my number. He called the next morning, not the next evening, not 3 days later, the next morning, which told me something about who he was, or who I thought he was. We dated for 6 months before he told me about Jordan. We were sitting in his kitchen, late on a Sunday afternoon, sunlight cutting low across the counter. Marcus set down his coffee cup, looked at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before, something stripped of its usual ease, and said, I have to tell you something, and I need you to hear all of it before you respond. Jordan was 10 months old. His mother, Marcus said her name was Diane, had been a woman Marcus had a relationship with before we met. She had not wanted to be a mother. When Jordan arrived, she handed him to Marcus, signed the paperwork, and left. Marcus said it simply and without drama, the way men sometimes tell painful things, flat, controlled, as if the absence of emotion is the same as having processed it. I looked at the photograph he showed me. Jordan, 10 months old, in a blue onesie, dark eyes wide and curious, one small fist pressed against his cheek. Something in me decided in that moment. Not about Marcus. I was not sure about Marcus yet, but about that baby. I decided that this child was not going to feel like a burden someone explained. He was not going to feel like a story people told in lowered voices. He was going to be loved with both hands, completely and without reservation, for as long as I was in the room. Marcus and I married 14 months later. I adopted Jordan legally before his 2nd birthday. And from that day, I did not think of him as my stepson, my adopted son, my husband's son, or any other qualified version of the word. He was my son. Full stop. End of conversation. I was the one who walked him through his fear of thunderstorms by sitting on the floor of his closet with a flashlight and a picture book until he fell asleep against my shoulder. I was the one who taught him to ride a bike in the parking lot of our apartment complex on a Saturday morning in June, running alongside him for 40 minutes until my lungs burned, and he finally, stayed upright on his own and screamed with a joy so pure it nearly knocked me over. I was the one who sat with him in the school counselor's office when he was 8 years old and a boy in his class told him that his real mother gave him away because he wasn't good enough. I held his hand in that office. I looked him straight in the eye and said, Jordan, listen to me very carefully. The woman who gave birth to you made a choice, and I made a choice, and I pick you. Every single day, without exception, I pick you. He cried for a while. Then he ate a juice box and 2 graham crackers and told me he wanted chicken for dinner. That's the child I raised. Marcus was present for the big moments in the way that men with his particular personality tend to be. He came to the championship soccer game in 5th grade, the one Jordan's team actually won, and he was loud and joyful, and the other dads liked him enormously. He came to the middle school science fair when Jordan won 3rd place with a project on water filtration. He showed up in a nice shirt, and told Jordan he was proud of him and took a photograph. But he did not know Jordan's best friend's name until Jordan mentioned it at dinner one night, and Marcus nodded along as if he had known it the whole time. He did not know that Jordan had been afraid of the dark until he was 12 and stopped being afraid of it. He did not know that Jordan's favorite book was The Alchemist, that he reread it every summer, that he kept his worn copy on the top shelf of his bookcase like something sacred. I knew all of these things because I was the one who was there, not for the photographs, for the Tuesday afternoons and the 3 a.m. coughs and the homework crises and the long, quiet car rides where nothing needed to be said. I tell you all of this not to make Marcus a villain in the past. That is not the story I'm telling. I tell you so that when Jordan stood up in that banquet hall and began to speak, you understand what was behind every word. He walked to the front of the room with the kind of calm that takes most people decades to develop. 22 years old, dressed in a dark jacket, his graduation tassel still clipped to his lapel. He held out his hand for the microphone, and Marcus, still smiling, still riding the certainty that this was his moment, handed it over without hesitation. Jordan turned first to the room. Then slowly, deliberately, he turned to face his father. "I've been sitting here for the last 3 minutes," Jordan said, trying to decide whether to be angry. The room held its breath. I decided not to be. Jordan's voice did not shake. It did not rise. It was the voice of someone who had thought about this moment, or something very much like it, for a long time. Not tonight specifically, but the moment when he would have to say something true in front of people who had been living inside a story that wasn't quite right. He turned the microphone slowly in his hands, a small gesture, the way someone handles a thing carefully when they know its weight. "My dad just called my mom a babysitter." He said it plainly, and the word landed in that room like a stone dropped into still water, the ripples moving outward, touching every table, every face. I want to correct that. Marcus's smile began to do something complicated. It didn't disappear exactly. It became uncertain, the smile of a man who has just realized the room is no longer arranged the way he thought it was. "Catherine Mercer," Jordan said, and he turned toward me now, and something about hearing him say my name that way, fully, formally, like a statement of record, made my throat tighten so severely I had to press my lips together. "This woman drove 4 hours round trip to every single one of my travel baseball games from the time I was 9 until I was 14. Not one exception. Not once." Someone at a nearby table made a quiet sound. Not a gasp, something softer. The sound of recognition. "She sat in a hospital waiting room for 6 hours when I had my appendix out at 16 and wasn't allowed inside because visiting hours had ended." Jordan paused. "She waited anyway. They found her in the same chair at 2 in the morning when the nurse came to update her." I pressed my hand against my mouth. "She is the reason I applied to Westbrook. She is the reason I finished. She is the reason I believe that the point of life is to do work that means something, because she lived that in front of me every single day." He stopped, took a breath. "Babysitters go home at the end of the night," Jordan said, his voice quieter now but somehow carrying even further. "My mom never went home, because home was wherever she was." The silence that followed was the kind that only happens when a room full of people has been moved past the point of needing to say anything. Professor Mills, who sat at the faculty table near the front, pressed her knuckle against her lips. I saw Jordan's closest friend, Derek, who had known us since middle school, drop his head and stare at the table. And then Jordan did something I did not expect. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and removed a folded card. He had prepared for this. Not as revenge, I understood that immediately, but as a counter-truth. He had come ready. "I wrote something," he said, unfolding it. "I wrote it 3 weeks ago because I was going to read it as my toast tonight, and then Dad said he wanted to handle the tribute, so I stepped aside." He looked at his father then, just for a moment, with an expression that was not unkind. "I shouldn't have." He cleared his throat and read. "The people who raise us are not always the ones who brought us into the world. Sometimes the most important mother is the one who chose you, not out of biology, not out of obligation, but out of something I've spent 22 years trying to find the right word for. I think the word is love. Plain, unglamorous, everyday love. The kind that doesn't need an audience. He refolded the card carefully. I'm proud of this degree, Jordan said, and I'm proud of the man I'm becoming. But I want everyone in this room to know, and I want her to know that whoever I am, the good parts of it, she built. He walked to where I was sitting. He set the microphone on the table in front of Marcus, not forcefully, not dramatically, just placed it there. And then he knelt down beside my chair and hugged me the way he had not hugged me since he was a small boy and the world had frightened him. I held on. I held on with both arms, and I did not care about the 300 people watching, and I did not care about Marcus's face, and I did not care about anything in the world except the fact that this child, this remarkable human being, was mine in the only way that had ever mattered. When I looked up, Marcus was still sitting at the head table. His champagne glass was on the table in front of him. His face had gone through several things and had arrived at something I had never seen there before, something small and exposed and utterly without cover. A few people began to clap, then more, and then the sound filled the room. I did not clap, I just held my son. Here is the thing about loving someone for 12 years. You develop a kind of loyalty to the story you've built with them. It becomes structural, load-bearing. And the moment you start pulling at the threads, you risk the whole architecture coming down. So instead, you learn to step around the loose threads, to smooth them with your foot when company's coming, to tell yourself that imperfection is not the same as a lie. I had been stepping around loose threads for a long time. The phone calls were the first thing I buried. Not the number of them. Marcus ran a development company, and his phone rang constantly, which was reasonable. It was the quality of certain calls, the ones where his voice dropped a register, where he moved to the hallway or the garage with the quiet, deliberate care of someone who is making sure they are not overheard, where he came back to bed looking at the wall instead of at me. Everything okay? I'd ask. Client, he'd say, you know how this business is. I did not know how the business was, but I knew how my husband's voice sounded when he was being entirely honest with me, and I knew the difference. I filed that difference under nothing for years, because the alternative, that there was a something, was a thing I was not ready to open. There were financial things, too, that I noticed and put down gently like fragile objects I didn't want to examine too closely. Marcus handled most of our household finances, which had been a natural division from the beginning of our marriage. He had a head for numbers, and I was frequently deployed. But there were months when the numbers he showed me didn't quite line up with what I'd expected. Small differences, never large enough to raise a flag on their own. I remember once, about 4 years into our marriage, I found a withdrawal from our joint account, a transfer of $900 to a personal account I didn't recognize. I asked Marcus about it that evening, standing in the kitchen while he chopped vegetables for dinner. He didn't turn around. Took care of a personal debt, he said. Nothing serious. A buddy of mine had a rough month. Which buddy? I asked. He turned then and looked at me with an expression that was somewhere between patient and slightly wounded. Cat, he said. He called me Cat when he wanted me to feel like I was being unreasonable. I've never once questioned what you spend. Can I have the same? I felt that familiar thing rise in my chest, the desire to be fair, to not be the suspicious wife, to preserve the peace. And I let it go. I let it go, and I handed him the salad tongs, and we had dinner, and the evening moved on. That is the version of me I have the most complicated feelings about now. Not the woman who trusted. Trust is not weakness, but the woman who recognized something and talked herself out of it repeatedly, because confronting it felt like a form of disloyalty to a life I had chosen and invested in. I was also frequently gone, 3, sometimes 4 months at a stretch, and every time I came home, there was a period of recalibration, of becoming a family again, of finding the rhythm of shared space and shared meals after months of separation. That recalibration takes energy. It takes focus. It does not leave much room for excavating things that were, at least on the surface, holding still. Jordan held us together in many ways during those periods. He was the common ground Marcus, and I could always return to his school play, his report card, his latest obsession with whatever he was teaching himself on YouTube that month. Jordan was the conversation we could always have even when we had run out of others. I think about that now with something that is not quite sadness and not quite anger, something in between, a complicated grief for the version of my marriage I believed in. After the graduation, after Jordan and I sat in his car for an hour in the parking lot talking with the engine off and the summer air coming through the cracked windows, I went home to an empty house. Marcus had not come back. His car was gone. I walked through rooms that were perfectly familiar and felt completely foreign, the way a landscape looks different after a storm moves through it. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. And then I opened my laptop. I want to be honest about what I was looking for. I was not looking for confirmation of a betrayal. I was looking for understanding, for the pieces that would make the shape of the last 12 years make sense. Because something in Marcus's voice in that banquet hall had told me that what he said was not just cruelty fueled by champagne. It was something he had believed, and probably said in private, for a very long time. I found the first bank statement by accident. I had been trying to pull up our joint account to look at the household balance, and I logged into the wrong window. An older portal Marcus had linked to his personal email on our shared computer. The account that came up was not one I recognized. It had been receiving regular transfers, monthly, without exception, for 9 years. The name on the receiving end of those transfers was Diane Holloway. I sat very still for a very long time. Diane, the woman Marcus had told me left. The woman he said gave Jordan up and disappeared. The woman I had spent 12 years not asking about because he'd made it clear, quietly and consistently, that it was a closed door, a painful chapter he needed to leave behind. 9 years of monthly payments, regular as a subscription, to a woman who was supposed to be gone. I did not sleep that night. I sat at that kitchen table until the sky outside the window went from black to deep blue to the pale gray of early morning, and I moved through a dozen different emotional states the way you move through weather when you're standing still, each one arriving, settling briefly, then giving way to the next. There was the cold shock first, the kind that doesn't feel like emotion at all, just a stillness so complete it's almost peaceful, the way everything goes quiet right before something large happens. Then the anger, not the hot, sharp kind that would come later. This was a low, heavy anger, the kind that sits in your chest like a stone. The anger of someone who has been played for a fool inside the one place they believed they were safe. Then, and this surprised me, grief. Real and specific grief. Not for Marcus, not yet, but for the marriage I had believed I was in. For 12 years of Tuesday mornings, and shared meals and inside jokes, and the particular intimacy of sleeping beside the same person night after night, until their breathing becomes something your body listens for without you deciding to. I grieved that. I grieved it even knowing it had been built on something I didn't have the full picture of. And then, underneath all of it, something else. Something quieter and more important. Relief. Because every thread I had talked myself out of pulling, every moment I had smoothed over, every midnight phone call I had accepted a casual explanation for, they had not been nothing. They had been something. I had known they were something. And there is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from spending years convincing yourself that what you see isn't what you see. I had been tired in a way I couldn't name for a long time. And sitting at that table in the pale early morning, I understood what the tiredness was. I called my sister Patricia at 6:30 in the morning. Patricia is 3 years older than me and has been my closest friend since we were children sharing a bedroom in our parents' house in Savannah. She picked up on the second ring because Patricia has always known when I am calling for a real reason. I told her everything, from the toast to Jordan's speech to the bank statements. Patricia listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I love most about her. She gives you the full space of what you're saying before she responds. When I finished, there was a short silence. "Okay," she said. "First, Jordan is extraordinary and you raised that boy right." "I know," I said, and my voice cracked on both words. "Second," Patricia said, "I am on the first flight I can get." "You don't need to." "Catherine Elizabeth Mercer," she said, using all three names the way our mother used to when a conversation was over. "I am on the first flight I can get. Make coffee." She arrived at noon. She walked through my front door with a carry-on bag and 2 boxes of the good donuts from the place downtown that I love and she knows I love. And she set them on the counter and put her arms around me and held on for a long time without saying anything. And that was the moment I finally cried. Not gently, not quietly. The kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep and takes a while to release everything it has been holding. Patricia held me through all of it and did not try to rush it or minimize it or skip to the solution, because she has always understood that some things need to be felt completely before they can be moved past. When I was done, she made the coffee. We sat at the kitchen table together and she looked at me carefully. "You've known something was wrong for a long time," she said. It wasn't a question. "Not known," I said. "Suspected, felt I kept talking myself out of it." "Because you didn't want to blow up your life." "Because I didn't want to blow up Jordan's life," I said. And that was the truth. That was always the truth. Whatever suspicions I had buried them not out of weakness, but out of a calculation that a stable home mattered more than my need to be right. I would make that calculation differently now. But I understand the version of me who made it. Patricia nodded slowly. "So what do you want to do?" I looked at the window. The morning light was full now, coming through the kitchen curtains the way it did every day, warm and ordinary and completely unchanged by everything that had happened in the last 12 hours. "I want to understand exactly what I'm dealing with," I said. "All of it, before I make a single move." Patricia reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. "Then that's what we do first." Marcus came back that afternoon. I heard his car in the driveway from where I was sitting in the living room, and I heard the way he paused at the front door, the slight hesitation of someone trying to read what's waiting on the other side. Patricia had gone to the guest room to give us privacy, though she had looked at me very carefully before she left and said, "I'll be right there. You say the word." I didn't need the word. I was ready. Marcus walked in looking like a man who had spent the night preparing something. He had changed his clothes. He was carrying an expression that I recognized from 12 years of marriage, his reasonable face. The face he wore when he was going to explain something in a way that made his choices sound almost logical. "Catherine," he started. "Sit down, Marcus." Something in my tone stopped him. He sat. I had the laptop open on the coffee table. I had the bank statements printed and stacked neatly beside it. Patricia had helped me organize them the night before. I had not prepared a speech. I had prepared facts. 9 years, I said. Every month, without exception, you transferred money to Diane Holloway. I want to hear you explain that. He looked at the statements. Something crossed his face, not guilt, exactly. Something more like the calculation of a man deciding how much truth is necessary. "She needed help," he said finally. "She was struggling financially. I felt responsible." "You felt responsible," I repeated. "We have a history, Kat. She's Jordan's biological mother. I couldn't just..." "You told me she was gone," I said. "You told me she gave Jordan up and walked away and you never heard from her again. You told me that for 12 years. It's complicated." "It isn't, actually." My voice was very calm. I had prepared for the reasonable face, and I had prepared my own version of calm, the kind I use when I am in a room where I need to be the most precise person present. "You maintained a financial relationship with a woman you told me was no longer in your life. You used our joint income to fund it, and you hid it from me for 9 years. He leaned forward. "I knew you'd react like this, that's why I didn't." "React like what, Marcus?" I kept my voice level. "React like a woman who deserved to know the truth about where our money was going. React like your wife." He sat back, ran a hand through his hair. "How long have you known her?" I asked. "Not just since Jordan. How long have you actually known her?" The silence that followed was its own answer. I waited. "We dated on and off for about 3 years, he said at last. "Before I met you." "And during?" I asked. "During you and me?" Another silence. "Marcus." "It wasn't what you're thinking," he said quickly. By the time I met you, it was over. Jordan happened in the last few months before the end. She didn't want to keep the baby. She left. I told you all of that. You left out the part where it was never actually over, I said. The financial support wasn't about. I'm not asking you what the financial support was about, I said. I'm telling you what it was. It was a secret. You chose to keep a secret for 9 years inside our marriage. And you chose, last night in front of our son and 300 other people, to humiliate me rather than have one honest conversation with me. His jaw tightened. That wasn't supposed to go the way it did. I had a few drinks and You meant every word, I said quietly. That's what I know about you, Marcus. You have a particular kind of honesty that only comes out when you feel safe, when you think the room is yours. Last night you thought the room was yours. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something shift in his face. Not remorse. Not yet. Something more like the dawning awareness that the conversation was not going the way he had mapped it. I want you out of this house by Friday, I said. I've spoken with an attorney. I had not spoken with an attorney yet. Patricia had on my behalf that morning. It was close enough. Marcus stood. Catherine, let's not. I am not making a decision in anger, I said. I made this decision at 2 in the morning when the anger had already passed through me. This is a clear decision, made clearly. He stood in the middle of the living room for a moment. A man I had loved, looking at me with an expression that was hovering somewhere between protest and grief, and I felt the grief too. I want to be honest about that. I felt it alongside the clarity. Both things were real. Both things could be true. Jordan, he started. Jordan is an adult, I said. You should have thought about him before last night. Marcus left without another word. I sat in the quiet of the living room for a long moment. Then I heard Patricia's footsteps in the hallway, unhurried and steady, and she came and sat beside me on the couch and didn't say anything at all, which was exactly right. The attorney Marcus found underestimated me. I say this not to be unkind, but because it is a fact that shaped the next several months significantly. Her name was Barbara Oakes, sharp-featured, late 50s, with a reputation in our city for aggressive settlement negotiations. She sent a letter within 2 weeks of Marcus moving out, laying out what she described as a fair and mutually beneficial separation framework that would have left me with the house, a modest monthly support payment, and a percentage of Marcus's business that was structured in a way that, as my own attorney immediately pointed out, would depreciate significantly within 3 years. My attorney was a woman named Linda Crawford. She had been recommended to me by a fellow officer whose divorce 2 years earlier had been, by all accounts, a precise and thorough process. Linda had a quiet, methodical manner that reminded me of the best intelligence analysts I had worked with in the field. She moved without noise and arrived at conclusions before you realized the question had been fully asked. He's tried to make this look simple, Linda told me at our second meeting, laying the counter-proposal across her desk. Which tells me there are things he doesn't want to get complicated. She was right. What the financial discovery process uncovered over the following 8 weeks was something considerably larger than 9 years of monthly transfers to Diane Holloway. It was a pattern, systematic, deliberate, spanning nearly the entire length of our marriage. Marcus had, over 12 years, funneled money from 3 different channels I had not been aware of. There was a business account, technically a subsidiary of his development company, that held assets he had never disclosed in any of our financial conversations. There were 2 insurance policies with beneficiaries I did not recognize. And there was a structured loan, taken out against the equity of our home, my name forged on the application, that had been used to fund a property purchase I had known nothing about. A property in Charleston, South Carolina. A property that Diane Holloway had been living in for the past 4 years. I sat with that information for a full day before I let myself respond to it. I went for a long run, 7 miles along the trail behind our neighborhood, the one I always ran when I needed to think without the interference of walls and furniture and the particular weight of familiar rooms. I ran until my legs ached and my mind cleared, and then I ran a little further. When I came back, I called Linda. Tell me what full disclosure looks like in this state, I said. It looks like everything, she said. Then that's what we're after. I want to be precise about something here, because I think it matters. I did not pursue the financial investigation to punish Marcus emotionally. I'm a person who believes in proportional response and clean purpose. I pursued it because I had spent 12 years making financial decisions, sacrificing career assignments, managing household spending, turning down personal purchases, based on a picture of our finances that had been deliberately obscured. I had a right to the true picture. Full stop. But I will not pretend the truth did not have consequences. Marcus's employer learned of the forged loan documents through the discovery process. Commercial real estate, as an industry, runs on trust and signature verification. The partners of his firm launched their own internal review within days of receiving Linda's requests. 2 of the 3 partners stopped returning Marcus's calls. His largest ongoing client, a development group that had been with Marcus for 6 years, quietly announced they were moving their portfolio elsewhere. Word moved through the professional community the way it always does, not loudly, but completely. The kind of quiet that follows a man from room to room once the rooms have been told something they cannot unknow. I heard some of this secondhand, through Patricia, through a few mutual friends who called with the careful, diplomatic language people use when they are trying to pass along information while maintaining plausible deniability. I listened. I thanked them. I did not respond beyond that, because the investigation was already doing what it needed to do, and I had learned long ago that in any conflict, the less you say publicly, the more powerful your position remains. Jordan called me during this period regularly. He had gone back to his apartment near campus, was preparing to start his new job in the fall, and called 3 or 4 times a week in a way that was different from how he'd called before, more attentive, more deliberate, as if he understood that I needed to hear his voice even when neither of us had specific news to share. "How are you actually doing?" he asked one night. "Some days better than others," I told him honestly. "That's a straight answer," he said. "I appreciate that. I don't have the energy for the other kind right now." He was quiet for a moment. "Mom," he said, "I'm sorry you spent so long not knowing." "Don't be sorry on his behalf," I said gently. "That's his weight to carry." "I mean, I'm sorry that carrying us cost you things you shouldn't have had to give." I pressed the phone against my ear. "Jordan," I said, "listen to me. There is not a single day of those 12 years that I would trade. Not one morning, not one car ride, not one school drop-off. You understand me?" "Yeah," he said softly. "I understand you." "Good. Now tell me about the new job." And we talked for another 40 minutes, easy and warm, the way we always talked. And when we hung up, I sat for a while in the quiet of the house and felt, underneath everything, a deep and unshakable sense that whatever had been broken, the most important thing was still intact. 3 months after the graduation, I received a letter. It arrived on a Tuesday morning in a plain white envelope with a Charleston, South Carolina postmark. My name was handwritten on the front in small, careful letters, the handwriting of someone who had rewritten it several times before committing to the final version. I stood at the kitchen counter for a while before I opened it. The letter was from Diane Holloway. She wrote 3 pages, front and back, in the same careful handwriting. I am not going to reproduce it word for word here. It belongs to a conversation I have not decided how to continue yet, but I will tell you what she said, because it mattered. She had heard about the graduation. She didn't say how Charleston is not that far from our city, and people talk, and Marcus, apparently, had been making phone calls in the weeks following the ceremony as his professional and personal world contracted around him. She said she had thought about reaching out for years and had never been able to find a reason that felt sufficient until now. She said she had made choices at 23 that she had lived with ever since, and that she did not expect forgiveness and was not asking for it. That she had spent a long time telling herself that Jordan was better off not knowing her, that her absence was a gift she gave him, and that she had come to understand, slowly and painfully, that she had said those things primarily to make herself feel better about a decision that was fundamentally about her own fear. She said she had been watching, from the outside, as someone who paid attention from a distance, and that she had seen enough to know that Jordan had been loved by someone who deserved to know that their choice had mattered. She said, "I know you don't owe me a thing, but I needed you to know that the boy you raised, I saw a clip of what he said at graduation, and I watched it 4 times. He is the kind of man that only happens when someone does exactly what you did. I'm glad he had you. I'm glad he has you." I read the letter twice. Then I folded it carefully and put it in the drawer of my nightstand. I haven't replied yet. I'm not sure I will. But I haven't thrown it away either, and I think that tells me something about where I am in this. The divorce was finalized 6 weeks after that letter arrived. Linda Crawford had done her work completely, and the settlement reflected the full picture of 12 years of marriage and 12 years of financial concealment. I am not going to name specific numbers, because this story is not about money. What I will say is that Marcus left the marriage with considerably less than he arrived at it expecting to keep, and that the forged loan on our home was resolved in a way that protected my equity and formalized his liability clearly. He did not fight it the way Barbara Oakes had initially suggested he would. I think, by the time the discovery process was complete, the energy had gone out of the fight. When you have spent 12 years building a version of yourself that depends on no one looking too closely, and someone finally looks closely, all the way closely with professional help and no time limit, there is a particular kind of collapse that follows. Not dramatic, not loud. Just a steady deflation, like air leaving a space that was never as solid as it looked. I signed the final papers on a Thursday afternoon in Linda's office. She slid them across the desk to me, and I signed each one cleanly, no hesitation, and handed the pen back. "How do you feel?" Linda asked. It was an unusual question for a closing meeting. I appreciated it. "Like I can breathe properly for the first time in a while," I said. She nodded once slowly. "That's the right answer." Marcus came to the house 5 months after the graduation. Unannounced, on a Saturday afternoon in late October when the trees on our street had turned, and the light was the particular golden color that October gets in the late afternoon. I saw him through the front window before he knocked. He was standing on the porch with his hands in his jacket pockets, and he looked like a man who had rehearsed something many times and was now uncertain whether any version of it was adequate. I thought about not answering. I stood there for a moment and genuinely considered it. Then I opened the door. He looked different from the last time I had seen him, which had been briefly in Linda's office hallway at the start of the settlement negotiations. Smaller, somehow. Not physically, Marcus was still tall, still the same broad-shouldered man I had married. But there was something gone from him. The ease, the particular confidence of a person who has always believed that his charm is a currency that will spend anywhere. "Catherine," he said. I did not open the door wider. I did not invite him in. I stood in the doorway in my weekend clothes, jeans, an old army sweatshirt, no particular effort, and I looked at him directly. "Marcus, I know I don't have the right to ask for anything," he said. "I just needed to say something." "All right," I said. He looked down at the porch floor for a moment, then back at me. Whatever he had rehearsed, he seemed to have set it aside, because what came next had the rough, unpolished quality of something being said unrehearsed. "I told myself for a long time that what I built with you was real," he said. "And though the other things, the things you found out, I told myself those were separate, that they didn't touch us, that I had managed to keep them separate." "But they weren't separate," I said. "No," he said. "They weren't. They were inside everything." I nodded once. Not agreement with what he'd done, agreement that this was the truth. "I don't know when I became someone who could do those things," he said, and his voice had something in it that I had rarely heard there. "I don't have a good answer for that. I told myself stories for a long time, and I stopped questioning whether they were true." "You told me stories," I said, "for 12 years. "Yes," he didn't argue it. "I did." We stood in the quiet of the doorway. A car passed on the street. Somewhere down the block, a neighbor's dog barked once and went quiet. "I'm not here to ask you to change anything," Marcus said. Everything Linda did, the settlement, it's right. I know it's right. He paused. I'm here because Jordan won't return my calls, and I understand why. But I needed someone who knows me, knew me, to know that I understand what I actually did. I thought about that for a moment. About Jordan. About the careful way Jordan had said biology made you my father at the graduation, and the quiet finality of it. That's a conversation you need to have with him, I said. Not with me. I'm not your access point to him anymore. I know, he said. And Marcus, I said, understanding what you did is not the same as having done differently. You understand that? Yes, he said, I understand that. I looked at him for a moment, this man I had loved, who had built something real with me and hidden something false beside it for 12 years, and I felt something I did not expect. Not warmth, not forgiveness exactly, something quieter than both of those. A kind of finality. The feeling of a door closing not in anger, but because the room it leads to simply isn't somewhere you live anymore. I hope you figure out who you want to be, I said. Genuinely, I hope you do that work. He nodded. I hope Jordan. I'll tell him you came, I said. What he does with that is his. I closed the door. I stood in the hallway for a moment, and I waited for something, for the sadness, for the second guessing, for the familiar pull towards smoothing things over. None of it came. There was only a quiet, and inside the quiet, something that felt remarkably like solid ground. I went back to the kitchen. I poured another cup of coffee, and I sat down at my table in my house in the warm October afternoon and began to think, clearly and calmly, about what I wanted the next chapter of my life to look like. The winter was quieter than any I could remember in a long time. Not empty, quiet. There's a difference, and the difference matters. Empty quiet has a hollowness to it, an absence that presses against you. The quiet of that winter had texture. It had warmth in it. It was the quiet of a woman who had stopped listening for footsteps and phone calls and explanations and had started listening to herself instead. Jordan started his job in September. A project management position at an engineering firm downtown. The kind of role built for someone who thinks carefully before he speaks and never drops a detail. He called me on his first day, from the parking lot of the building, before he went in. He sounded the way he sounded as a child when he was standing at the edge of something big and new, alive with it, nervous in a good way, like someone about to find out something wonderful about themselves. You're going to be remarkable at this, I told him. How do you know? Because you've been remarkable at everything I've watched you try, I said. And you try things properly. That's rare. He laughed. It was his real laugh, the one that starts quiet and then takes over. I'll call you tonight. Go, I said. Go to the thing. He went. Patricia stayed for 3 weeks after the graduation. She drove me to appointments, kept the house from going too silent, made dinners I didn't have the energy to make myself, and told me stories about her own life and her own marriage and her own complicated history, with the difference between what we see and what we are willing to name, because she is that kind of sister, the kind who gives you her own life as a mirror so you can see yours more clearly. When she left, she held my face in both hands the way she'd done since we were girls and looked at me hard. You are the strongest person I know, she said. I'm tired, I said. Those things are not contradictory, she said. She was right, they aren't. I went back to work in the autumn, lighter duty, while the personal business settled, and then full active assignment by November. My commanding officer, Colonel Warren, a man I have worked alongside for 8 years, who has never once made me feel like my personal life had any bearing on my professional standing, mentioned in passing that I seemed focused. I am, I said. Good, he said. We need it. That was the full conversation. It was exactly enough. I tell you about those months, the coffee cups, the phone calls, the morning runs, the work, the sister, the ordinary material of rebuilding, because I think the version of this story that people most want to hear skips to the moment the villain falls and calls it a resolution. And the fall is real. Marcus's professional reputation did not recover. The business did not survive the internal reviews. The partners reorganized without him, and the company he had spent 15 years building carried on under a different name without his name on it. That happened. I am not going to pretend it didn't, or that there wasn't a part of me, a very human part, that understood justice in that outcome. But the resolution was not Marcus falling. The resolution was the morning I woke up and realized I had slept through the night completely, without listening for anything, and I lay in the quiet of my bedroom and felt clearly, without qualification, that I was all right. That the house was mine. That the life I was going to build from here was going to be built on accurate ground, with true information, by a woman who had learned, the hard way and at some cost, to stop talking herself out of what she already knew. There was a moment, a few weeks before Christmas, that I want to tell you about. Jordan came home for a long weekend. He brought ingredients and made dinner on Friday night pasta from scratch, which he had learned to make from a tutorial he watched 3 times in his apartment. He served it with a look of quiet pride that he was trying not to make too visible, which was so entirely him that I laughed before I even tasted it. It was excellent pasta. We ate at the kitchen table with the porch light on and the early dark outside the window, and we talked the way we had always talked, easily, honestly, about everything and nothing. His job, a book he'd read, a friend who was going through something difficult and what it meant to show up for someone in that. And at some point, I don't remember exactly when in the evening, somewhere between the pasta and the tea, Jordan set down his mug and looked at me with an expression I had not seen before. It was the expression of an adult looking at another adult, stripped of the particular lens that children, even grown children, often look at their parents through. "I want to say something," he said. "Okay." "I've been thinking," he said, "about what you said at the graduation, not what you said because you didn't say much. What you did. You let me handle it. You didn't step in. You didn't try to manage it." "It wasn't mine to manage," I said. "Most parents would have," he said. "Most parents would have grabbed my arm or said it's fine, Jordan, let it go, or done the thing where they smooth it over to keep peace in the room." "Peace in that room had already left," I said. He smiled at that. "Yeah, it had." He looked at his mug for a moment. "I spent 22 years watching you make decisions, big ones and small ones. And the thing I've learned from all of it is that you do what you believe is right even when it would be easier not to, even when no one would blame you for the easier choice." I held the warmth of that, quietly. "I want to be that kind of person," he said. "I want to be the kind of person who does the right thing even when it costs something." "You already are," I said. "You showed that in that room." "I learned it from you." We sat in the kitchen for a long time after that, the two of us, in the comfortable silence of people who do not need to fill every moment with noise, who have learned, together, through years of ordinary life, that presence is its own language, and the most important thing you can give someone is your full, genuine, undivided attention. I looked at my son across the table. 22 years old, already more himself than most people manage to become in a lifetime, and I thought about the photograph Marcus had shown me all those years ago. A tiny face in a hospital blanket, dark eyes, one small fist pressed to a cheek, and the decision I had made in that kitchen without fully understanding what I was deciding. I would make it again, every time, without hesitation. Because that is what love is, at its most honest. Not the version that shows up for the photographs, not the version that performs in front of a crowd. The version that stays for the Tuesday afternoons and the 3 a.m. coughs and the long, quiet car rides when nothing needs to be said. The version that chooses you, over and over, every day, without making a speech about it. Marcus thanked me in front of everyone for being a babysitter. He meant it to cut me down to size, to reduce 22 years of showing up to something transactional and temporary, the hired help, ready to be dismissed. What he did not understand, and what he could not have understood because he had never actually paid attention, is that my son already knew exactly what I was to him. And when given the chance to say it publicly, he did not hesitate. He said, home was wherever she was. You can spend 12 years hiding the truth from someone. You can build whole architectures of omission and careful deflection. You can manage the story so completely that the person living beside you never sees the full shape of what's underneath. But you cannot spend 12 years teaching a child who to be and then be surprised when he becomes it. I raised a man who tells the truth, even when it costs him something. Jordan is not the child Marcus brought home. He is not the product of secrets and performance and carefully managed appearances. He is exactly who I raised him to be. And that is mine, completely, without qualification. Nobody, not one single person on earth, can take that from me. If this story moved something in you, I'd love to know which moment stayed with you longest. Leave it in the comments, and if you believe someone in your life needs to hear a story about what it means to really show up, share this with them. We have more stories like this one coming every week. Subscribe so you never miss a moment.